November 2, 1943. At 22,000 feet above the Bismarck Sea, Staff Sergeant Michael Russo watches contrails multiply behind his B-24 Liberator. Thin white streaks spread across the blue Pacific sky like cracks moving through glass. The tail gunner tightens his grip on the handles of his twin .50 caliber Browning machine guns. Through the plexiglass dome of his turret, hanging off the bomber's tail, he counts the shapes forming out of those trails. Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters, dozens of them. His intercom crackles to life. The pilot's voice carries the forced calm of a man who understands exactly what the odds are. The bomber formation has scattered. The clouds have vanished. The expected P-38 Lightning escort never showed up. Russo's aircraft, call sign Devil's Daughter, is completely alone. The Zeros break into pairs, beginning their attack runs. Russo glances at his ammunition boxes. Standard belt loading 5 armor-piercing rounds, 1 tracer. The ratio issued to every Army Air Force's gunner, the ratio he was ordered to use. But Staff Sergeant Russo had made a choice 3 nights earlier, one that broke direct orders. While the ground crew slept, he rebuilt his ammo belts by hand. 2 armor-piercing, 2 incendiary, 1 tracer. The 2-2-1 mix was strictly banned on B-24s. The incendiary rounds produced extreme heat that could warp barrels, or even ignite fuel vapor inside the tight turret. The first Zero drops into its attack dive, sunlight flashing off its wings. What happens over the next 40 minutes would be investigated, documented, and then quietly buried in classified files, an aerial fight so unlikely that official records would argue about it for decades. By autumn 1943, the Solomon Islands campaign had turned into a brutal war of attrition. The 5th Air Force and 13th Air Force launched daily bombing strikes on Japanese strongholds at Rabaul, Bougainville, and fortified positions across New Britain. B-24 Liberators carried most of the load, flying from bases in New Guinea and the Solomons to hit targets protected by some of Japan's best fighter units. The consolidated B-24 Liberator carried a 10-man crew and was packed with defensive guns, 10.50 caliber M2, Browning machine guns mounted in the nose, dorsal turret, ball turret, waist positions, and tail. With 4 Pratt & Whitney R1830 twin Wasp engines producing 1,200 horsepower each, the Liberator reached a top speed of 303 miles per hour and could climb to 28,000 feet. Its range of 2,500 miles made it perfect for long-range missions deep into Japanese-held territory. But range meant nothing without fighter cover. The Mitsubishi A6M0 was still the Imperial Japanese Navy's leading fighter in late 1943, even as newer planes entered service. Powered by a 1,130 horsepower Nakajima Seikei radial engine, the Zero hit 350 miles per hour and could outturn any American fighter below 20,000 feet. Armed with 2 20mm cannons and 2 7.7mm machine guns, a single Zero had enough firepower to destroy a bomber's control surfaces or explode its fuel tanks. Japanese fighter tactics against B-24 groups followed a proven formula. Zeros attacked in coordinated waves, usually 8 to 12 fighters per wave, going after bombers that fell behind or were damaged and cut off from protection. They hit the Liberator's blind spots, the area under the nose, the gaps between waist guns, and the brief moments when turret gunners reloaded. Reports from the 5th Bomber Command in October and November 1943 showed a grim truth. B-24s without fighter escort suffered loss rates close to 40% on missions to heavily defended targets. Intelligence identified the 204th, 251st, and 253rd Kakutai elite Japanese naval fighter groups operating from airfields around Rabaul, with a combined force of more than 300 aircraft. The math was simple and brutal. A lone B-24 facing a large zero formation had only minutes to live. Ammunition loading rules for bomber defensive guns followed strict Army Air Force's technical orders. The standard 5:1 ratio 5 M2 armor-piercing rounds followed by 1 M1 tracer was designed for the European theater against German fighters. Armor-piercing rounds could punch through engine blocks or fuel tanks. Tracers helped gunners see their fire and adjust aim. But in April 1943, ordnance officers received a new incendiary round, the M1 incendiary tracer, which combined phosphorus ignition with visible flight. Reports from the Southwest Pacific showed that the new 221 loading 2 armor-piercing, 2 incendiary, 1 tracer was extremely effective against the Zero's lightweight frame and unprotected fuel tanks. The Army Air Forces immediately banned the 221 load on B-24 Liberators. The ban came from engineering concerns specific to the Liberator. Unlike the B-17 Flying Fortress, the B-24's turret sat much closer to fuel tanks and hydraulic lines. The M1 incendiary rounds created barrel temperatures above 800 degrees Fahrenheit during extended firing, hot enough to ignite fuel vapor, damage hydraulic seals, or warp barrels, causing deadly jams. Technical Order 1943-157, issued May 15, 1943, stated clearly, B-24 aircraft will use standard 5:1 ammunition belt loading only. Use of incendiary or incendiary tracer rounds in ratios greater than 1:6 is strictly forbidden except by written authorization from Group Ordnance. Officer violating the rule carried court-martial charges. Bomber crews knew the regulation. They also knew something else. The incendiary rounds worked against Zeros attacking from the rear. A single incendiary hit could turn a fighter into a fireball. The lightweight Japanese aircraft burned with terrifying speed once their fuselage fuel tanks caught fire. Some gunners decided the risk of a court-martial was worth it compared to the near certainty of death without strong defensive fire. Japanese fighter leaders in the Southwest Pacific held a calculated disrespect for the B-24 Liberator's defensive strength. Unlike the B-17 Flying Fortress, which flew in tight formations that combined their firepower into lethal walls, B-24 groups often spread out at higher altitudes where the aircraft became harder to handle. Intelligence files recovered from Rabaul in late 1943 included tactical notes issued to Zero pilots. One document, translated by Allied intelligence officers, described the Liberator as exposed to sustained stern attacks when separated from formation. It recommended a coordinated assault by 8 or more fighters. Defensive fire weakens quickly under steady pressure. This assessment was not arrogance. It was simple battlefield math. A Zero pilot approaching a B-24 from the tail faced fire from exactly 2 .50 caliber machine guns in the tail turret. At a convergence distance of 300 yards, those guns produced roughly 1,600 rounds per minute combined. But the turret's rotation speed limited how quickly the gunner could switch targets. A coordinated attack by several Zeros, approaching one after another with tight spacing, could overwhelm the gunner's ability to hit each threat effectively. Japanese pilots called this method the swarm. 8 to 12 Zeros would circle outside effective gun range, then dive together from multiple directions. High rear, low rear, beam attacks, all timed to force the gunner into impossible decisions. Which threat to fire on first? Which fighter was the most dangerous? Reports from the 43rd Bomb Group in October 1943 recorded 15 B-24s lost to fighter attacks. 11 had fallen out of formation. 8 showed heavy damage to their tail sections, proving how effective the swarm tactic was. What Zero pilots didn't know was that some B-24 gunners were rewriting the odds. The standard 5-to-1 ammunition mix gave a tail gunner around 20 tracer rounds per 500-round box 20 chances to see his fire and adjust aim. But tracer visibility came with a price: reduced stopping power. A Zero could take several armor-piercing hits and keep flying, the rounds punching through its light frame without hitting vital parts. Incendiary rounds changed the equation completely. The M1 incendiary tracer contained a phosphorus charge that ignited on impact, burning at nearly 50 degrees Fahrenheit, against the Zero's unprotected fuel system and fabric-covered control surfaces. A single incendiary hit could be devastating, but Army Air Forces rules limited their use on B-24s for valid safety reasons. The guns could fail at the worst possible time. Staff Sergeant Michael Russo understood the rule. He also knew something else. His crew flew missions against the hardest targets in the region. They met enemy fighters on nearly every sortie. Regulation ammunition hadn't saved the crews who were shot down the previous week. On the night of October 30th, 1943, Russo went to the ordnance tent at Dobodura Airfield in New Guinea. He told a supply sergeant he needed to fix a damaged ammo belt. He took 1,000 rounds of M2 armor-piercing, 1,000 rounds of M1 incendiary tracer, and a hand-cranked linking machine back to his tent. For 3 hours under a flashlight, he rebuilt his belts: 2 armor-piercing, 2 incendiary, 1 tracer. Then he loaded them into Devil's Daughter's tail turret ammunition boxes. Before we continue, I'd like to know where you're watching from and what you know about B-24 tail gunner combat in the Pacific Theater. Leave a comment below and tell me if you've heard about Forbidden's ammo loads before. And if you're enjoying these deep dives into World War II aviation history, hit that subscribe button. These stories require serious research to tell correctly, and knowing you're here makes it worth it. The mission briefing on November 2nd targeted Japanese shipping in Rabaul Harbor. A 12-hour round trip that involved forming up over Ora Bay, navigating across the Solomon Sea, the bombing run, and the long return to Dobodura. Intelligence predicted moderate fighter resistance 20 to 30 Zeros. Intelligence was wrong by a factor of 4. Devil's Daughter held the number 3 position in the low squadron, a somewhat safer place in the formation. But at 0847 hours, 20 minutes from the target, the formation hit a weather front that briefings claimed would not be there. Massive cumulus clouds forced the lead squadron to climb. The high squadron turned left looking for clear sky. The low Squadron 6 aircraft, including Russo's, continued straight. Within 3 minutes, Devil's Daughter was alone. Russo spotted them first contrails at 2 o'clock high, coming down. He pressed his intercom. "Bandits, 2 o'clock. Lots of them." The pilot's reply crackled through his headset. "How many?" Russo counted the shapes, counted again. "Jesus Christ. 50, 60, maybe more." The Zeros circled at a distance, studying them. Their discipline was obvious. No reckless single attacks, no wasted rounds. They were waiting for the perfect moment. The bomber's pilot makes his choice. Continue toward the target alone or abort and risk meeting the same fighters on the return trip. He chooses the first option. "We're going in." Gunners, make every shot count. The Zeros attack at 0853 hours. The first wave sends 8 fighters in a coordinated rear assault. 4 high, 4 low, approaching in pairs with 30-second spacing. Standard Japanese tactics. Overwhelming fire aimed at one turret position. Russo swings his turret to follow the lead pair diving in from 4 o'clock high. Range 800 yards. His modified ammunition starts feeding through the twin Brownings. He holds fire. 700 yards. The Zeros grow larger in his sight. Their wings flash as they open fire 20 mm cannon and 7.7 mm machine gun rounds blazing. 600 yards. Tracers streak past Russo's turret. A 20mm shell punches through the bomber's vertical stabilizer 3 feet above his head. 500 yards. Now Russo squeezes the triggers. The twin .50s roar. Their combined rate of fire rips into the lead zero at 1,600 rounds per minute. Every fifth round is a tracer. He watches his fire walk across the fighter's engine cowling. The incendiary rounds detonate on impact. The Zero's engine compartment erupts not in smoke or flame, but in a violent explosion. The Nakajima engine cylinders burst apart as incendiary rounds ignite fuel vapor and oil at the same moment. The aircraft flips left, trailing burning fuel like a comet, spinning past the B-24's tail. Russo doesn't watch it go down. His turret is already turning right to lock onto the second Zero. He fires a 3-second burst. Incendiaries slice across the fighter's fuselage. The fabric-covered controls burst into flame. The Zero pulls up sharply, trailing fire, then flips over and falls away. Elapsed time, 18 seconds. 2 fighters down. The second pair attacks from 5 o'clock low. Russo lowers his guns and fires. The lead Zero takes a burst across its wing root. The incendiary rounds punch into the internal fuel tank. The explosion tears the wing completely off. The plane tumbles end over end through the Liberator's prop wash. His ammo counter shows 320 rounds left in the first belt. The second wave comes in immediately 12 Zeros in a coordinated pattern designed to exploit tail gunner reload time. But Russo isn't reloading. His modified ammo boxes feed continuously. 3 Zeros dive from 7 o'clock high. Russo tracks the leader and fires. The incendiary rounds ignite the fuselage. The pilot bails out at 21,000 feet. Russo shifts to the wingman. A 4-second burst. The Zero's canopy bursts in phosphorus fire. The nose drops, and the aircraft plunges straight down into the ocean. Chaos fills his intercom. The top turret fires nonstop at beam attacks. The waist gunners shout target calls. The pilot calls altitudes and headings. Russo shuts it out. The Zeros are no longer following their pattern, they're swarming. 2 fighters attack at the same moment from 4 and 8 o'clock. Russo chooses 8 o'clock, the closer threat. He fires. Incendiaries walk across the Zero's fuselage from tail to nose. The fighter explodes so close to the turret that burning debris slams against his plexiglass dome. He swings to 4 o'clock. The Zero is already firing. Cannon shells tear into the bomber's left horizontal stabilizer. Russo pulls the triggers. Nothing. Jam. His training kicks in. Left hand racks the charging handle. Right hand keeps the turret moving. The jam clears. Both guns resume firing. The Zero takes the full burst through the cockpit, rolls inverted, and drops away. More Zeros attack. The modified ammunition is performing beyond anything Russo expected. Every burst that connects doesn't just damage, it destroys. The lightweight Zeros, built for maneuverability instead of durability, cannot survive the incendiary round's thermal impact. A Zero makes a straight rear attack the perfect angle. Russo centers it in his sight and holds the triggers for 6 straight seconds. The fighter's entire fuselage bursts into flame. It doesn't dodge or escape. It simply breaks apart, pieces of burning airframe falling through the sky. His ammo counter reads 140 rounds. 3 Zeros remain in attack position. They circle, observing. Then, without warning, they break off. Russo watches them turn east toward Riebol. The fight lasted 42 minutes. When the adrenaline fades, Russo presses his intercom. His voice is hoarse from thin oxygen and shouting calls he doesn't recall making. Tail turret. I'm out of ammunition. Guns are done. The pilot's reply mixes relief and disbelief. How many did you get? Russo checks his ammo counter. He fired 960 rounds of the 1,000 available. At the modified belt ratio, that equals 40 firing sequences. He counts the fighters he saw burning or falling. 11 confirmed, he answers. Maybe more. The intercom goes silent. Devil's Daughter lands at WWII at 15:34 hours with 2 engines damaged, failing hydraulics and 187 bullet holes measured by ground crews. The tail guns are warped from heat, exactly the failure the incendiary regulations warned about. Staff Sergeant Russo doesn't mention his modified ammunition to the debrief officer. Neither does his crew. The official report reads, engaged multiple enemy fighters, 11 confirmed destroyed by tail gunner. Standard defensive tactics employed. But the numbers cannot be ignored. 5th Bomber Command intelligence officers reviewed the report with skepticism bordering on hostility. 11 confirmed kills by a single tail gunner exceeds the documented record for any bomber defensive position in the region. The previous high 6 confirmed kills was achieved by a B-17 top turret gunner during the Battle of Midway. 3 days after the mission, an ordnance investigation officer arrives at WWII. He inspects Devil's Daughter's tail turret. He photographs the warped gun barrels. He counts the spent belt links scattered across the turret floor. Then he does the math. The 221 belt loading is undeniable. Russo faces formal questioning on November 7th. He doesn't deny altering the ammunition. The physical evidence is impossible to dispute. When asked why he ignored clear technical orders, his answer goes into the official record. I figured a court-martial beat dying. What happens next shows the deep conflict between regulations and battlefield reality. 5th Bomber Command forms a board of inquiry not to punish Russo, but to study the tactical impact. If a single gunner using modified ammunition could achieve these results, what did that mean for bomber defense across the theater? The board reviews several factors. Gun barrel analysis confirms extreme thermal stress. The barrels would have failed completely within another 200 rounds of firing. Russo survived the engagement by a margin of minutes in ammunition capacity, but he survived. More importantly, his aircraft survived. Devil's Daughter returned home when regulations implied it should have been lost. Metallurgical engineers at Wright Field examine the failed barrels and create new thermal management guidelines. If gunners fire in shorter bursts instead of long continuous strings, the heat from incendiary rounds can be controlled without catastrophic barrel failure. If turrets receive better ventilation, heat dissipation improves dramatically. By December 1943, 5th Bomber Command issues Tactical Bulletin TB43118, giving experimental approval for 221 ammunition loading on B-24's flying long-range, unescorted strike missions. Gunners will receive extra training in thermal control and burst fire discipline. The bulletin includes clear language. This authorization is provisional pending further combat evaluation. Gunners using modified loads accept higher equipment failure risks. Russo's engagement becomes a classified training case. Instructional films at gunnery schools teach the lessons, not only the ammo modification, but the firing discipline that made it effective. The key wasn't just incendiary rounds. It was target choice, range discipline, and controlled bursts under extreme pressure. Japanese intelligence never fully understood why zero losses against B-24 suddenly rose in late. 1943. Captured documents from Rabaul mention a new American incendiary weapon, but credit most increased. Losses to improve P-38 Lightning escort tactics. The truth was simpler and more personal. Individual gunners, facing near certain death under existing doctrine, made deliberate choices to break regulations in order to survive. Some failed incendiary rounds caused gun breakdowns at critical moments. Others, like Russo, succeeded beyond all expectation. By February 1944, the 2-to-1 ammunition load becomes standard across 5th Air Force B-24 units. The change saves aircraft and, more importantly, saves crews. Post-war studies estimate the revised ammo load contributed to a 12% reduction in bomber losses to fighters during the last 18 months of the Pacific War. 12% across thousands of missions, hundreds of planes, thousands of airmen. Staff Sergeant Michael Russo completes 34 combat missions with the 43rd Bomb Group. Before returning to the United States in March 1944, he receives the Distinguished Flying Cross for the November 2nd action. Although the citation avoids mentioning his unauthorized ammunition change, the medal honors extraordinary heroism and remarkable gunnery skill without naming the innovation that made the kills possible. The Army Air Forces face a bureaucratic conflict. Russo violated explicit rules, yet his violation clearly saved his crew and demonstrated a better tactic than the authorized one. Court-martial proceedings are quietly dropped. No charges appear in his record. Devil's Daughter never returns to combat. The damage from the November 2nd mission requires major repairs, destroyed control surfaces, crippled hydraulics, and structural stress in the tail section. The aircraft becomes a training airframe at WWII, used to teach ground crews how to inspect and repair battle-damaged bombers. The tail turret guns, warped beyond use by incendiary heat, are shipped to Wright Field in Ohio for metallurgical testing. Engineers use the failure data to design improved gun barrels with better heat resistance. The upgraded M2 HB heavy barrel version enters production in mid-1944, featuring thicker barrel walls that survive incendiary ammo without warping. Japanese fighter tactics evolved through 1944, but not because of American ammunition changes. As Allied forces capture airfields closer to Japanese bases, Zero units face shorter warning times and reduced ability to assemble large fighter groups. The swarm tactic that terrorized bomber crews in 1943 becomes increasingly rare by mid-1. Post-war interviews with surviving Japanese fighter pilots show they had little awareness of American ammunition changes. Former Zero ace Saburo Sakai, who flew missions against B-24 formations through late 1943, described the shift. American bomber defensive fire became noticeably more effective during the final years of the war, but we believe this was mainly due to better trained gunners and improved fighter coordination. The technical truth suggests a different cause. Statistical studies of bomber loss rates reveal a clear decline beginning in December 1943, matching exactly with the approval of 2-to-1 ammunition loading in the Pacific Theater. The European theater adopts similar changes by March 1944, though German fighters with heavier armor and stronger construction are less vulnerable to incendiary rounds than Japanese aircraft. Still, the psychological impact is significant. Luftwaffe pilots report growing hesitation to attack bomber formations after witnessing the increased destructive effects. Modern aviation historians continue to debate the exact details of Russo's engagement. 11 confirmed kills by a single tail gunner is extraordinary by any measure. Some researchers argue the confusion of battle may have caused duplicated counts or shared kills being credited to one position. Others point out that Japanese records confirm major fighter losses during early November 1943 raids on American bombers near Rabaul. What no scholar disputes is the impact of the tactical innovation. One gunner's choice to break regulations repeated across dozens and then hundreds of bombers directly improved defensive performance during a critical phase of the Pacific Campaign. The military's reaction choosing to study and adopt it Violation instead of punishing it shows the armed forces' ability to learn under combat pressure. Sometimes, doctrine must adjust to battlefield reality. War demands impossible decisions from ordinary people placed into extraordinary situations. Regulations exist for valid reasons. They protect equipment, preserve resources, and prevent avoidable casualties. But regulations assume predictable circumstances. They cannot account for the chaos of combat at 22,000 feet with 80 enemy fighters diving toward a single aircraft. Staff Sergeant Michael Russo faced the same choice every tail gunner in the Pacific confronted: follow orders and likely die, or break orders and possibly live. His decision was not rebellion. It was adaptation. Evolution driven by survival. The remarkable part is not that he modified his ammunition. It is that military leadership recognized the value of his change despite its unauthorized origin. The Army Air Forces could have punished him, enforced existing doctrine, and protected institutional authority. Instead, they investigated, analyzed, and adopted his innovation into official practice. That choice reflects institutional humility, the willingness to learn from subordinates when battlefield results overturn established doctrine. That humility saved lives. November 2, 1943. A lone B-24 Liberator over the Bismarck Sea. 80 Japanese fighters. One tail gunner using forbidden ammunition. 42 minutes of continuous combat. 11 enemy aircraft destroyed. The numbers tell one story, but the deeper story is about initiative, calculated risk, and the razor-thin boundary between innovation and insubordination. Sometimes the most meaningful victories don't come from following the manual, but from recognizing when the manual no longer applies. Sometimes survival requires writing your own rules. And sometimes, if you survive, those rules become doctrine. If you found this story as compelling as I did while researching it, I'd appreciate it if you'd like the video and subscribe to the channel. There are many more untold World War II stories that deserve attention, and I'll be sharing a new one every week. What should I cover next? Tell me in the comments below.